Welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the vlog, and welcome back to the next episode in my series of Behind the Raw, where I take you with me onto Lightroom Classic and I talk you through my thoughts, my workflow and my edit on an image from a recent shoot and any mistakes that I've made so that you don't have to. Now, this week, it's the turn of a trip that I went to Killarney. Now, something I always incorporate into my own workflow is that when I'm doing a workshop, I'll arrive the day before. And I'll arrive the day before because I want to scout out the location. I don't live in these areas, so I don't know what they're going to be like for when my clients arrive. So by me arriving the day before, it allows me to be able to get a lay of the land and know exactly what to expect. So I don't really have that many surprises, and I'm more prepared as well to make it a more immersive workshop. And that methodology has stood to me for many, many years. And it's something that when I went there, I said, okay, this is important. So I made a video about it, which is called The Importance or the Power of Scouting. And it's a tool that many people don't realize the strength that's there within. So the example in being is that where I went to was a stunning location. It was in the peak of autumn, but just at the top of peak. So almost falling off into the end, let's just say. So what that meant is that there's certain areas that had beautiful colour, and then there was other areas that had not so much colour. And the area I wanted to go to, which was a stunning waterfall, has a two-part area. So you've got a waterfall, and then behind that you've got a cascade. And I got a shot there from a number of years ago, and I wanted to replicate that shot, and I wanted to be able to bring my clients there so that they could replicate that shot. And what I discovered when I got there was that not only was the autumn on peak in certain areas, but in this area, one half of it had some colour remaining, and then the area I wanted to bring them to had no colour remaining. So I was very lucky that I actually had gone there to look at it, because otherwise I would have brought my clients there saying there's some beautiful colour and then there is no colour. So we wouldn't have wasted any time, we wouldn't have wasted any expectations, and ultimately I was able to create a better experience for that workshop crew. So if you haven't seen the episode on the power of scouting, I'd love for you to watch it. I'll link it up here. But for now, we're going to take an image from that and I'm going to talk you through my edit, like I said, my workflow on Lightroom Classic. Let's go. Okay, so here we are now with the image that I've decided to go through on the edit. And what you'll first notice when you look at this image here is it seems really underexposed. And it's not underexposed, but it's exposed for the highlights and exposed for as far right as I can go without me risking having any highlights blown. And if I look here and just show you first and foremost what the settings were. So I was at half a second, which is my preferred time for shooting water. And you'll see exactly why as we get to the edit on this. I was at F10, and I had dropped my ISO to 50 to again enable me to preserve those highlights. I was at 23mm and I was using my 1635 lens. Now if we look over here onto the histogram, which is generally, if you watch these episodes, you know this is my guiding light for what I can and cannot do with an image. And if you look here on the right hand side, you can see that the histogram is not clipping on any of the brights. But if I was to just slightly change this here and make the exposure a small bit larger, you look here what happens, you're getting more, and then all of a sudden it becomes here on a blown highlight, and I wanted to avoid that. So I purposely underexposed the image by one stop, and as you can see here, one stop is exactly what it says on the slider for exposure. So with this image, and what I really liked about this whole location is the flow of the water. And where I position myself as I drop down low here to be able to get in close enough to these rocks that are below me. You have some leaves that are on these rocks, and moreover you've got the water starting on the left hand side here coming up, and it was phenomenal actually where the water was kind of spraying over or cascading over within itself, so it's hitting a rock underneath and then bouncing back up. So every so often you got these shapes that came out of it, which were quite nice. And ultimately then if you look here at the top of the waterfall, you've got all that movement, but also it's not frozen in its shutter speed. Now the couple of things I'm going to do with this image here, because there's the things that I like and there's one thing that I don't like, and we're going to use the new AI remove tool actually on this to be able to help on the edit of this image. So first and foremost, what I'll do, and I'll generally do this anyway to show everybody what the power of auto can be. If you just click on auto here, you could theoretically say, okay, my image is edited. But I want to have more control, because if I look at this here, this is telling me that these areas are blacker than black, and up here as well is a blown white area, because it's basically taking a measure of the entire image and bringing out the entire image's detail. If you look here, what it's done, it's brought up its shadows quite a lot, it's brought the whites up, and it's brought the highlights down. So even at underexposing, because there is so much white within the frame, this is why it's more powerful to underexpose, because you've all this detail to be able to deal with or play with later. So what I'm going to do from this is I'm going to reset the image here, and then we're going to start effectively from scratch. So when I start looking again, histogram is going to tell me what I can and cannot do. So I'm going to bring my exposure up, and I'm going to bring it up probably around half a stop, I'd say. Yeah, I think that should be enough, and I can get more detail out when I start playing with the other areas. Now start looking at the highlights. There's nothing really to be able to deal with highlights right now, but as I make more changes, I may come back to highlights. And now if I start looking at shadows, if I whack the shadows all the way up to 100 here, for example, all this detail you can start to see is coming out down here in the rocks. And I loved all of these shapes and textures, and obviously with the leaves as well that were sitting here, and you can actually see some moisture as well that's on top of the leaf that's here anyway also. So what I'm going to do here from that is I'm going to make this fit the screen. I'm not going to go 100% on my shadows, but I am going to go quite high, because like I said in the outset, I underexposed on purpose, but I can play more with that when I start looking at the whites and the blacks. Now histogram, again, always going to tell me what I can and cannot do when I start looking at the whites. So if I take the whites here and I start bringing those up, if you look on this area here, when this lights up, when you've got this button clicked, it gives you the corresponding area of where it is too bright in the scene. But for me, that's a tiny amount, and I want to kind of go a small bit more anyway, try and bring that histogram more into the center. It's also giving me an area here which is overexposed, and actually is the area that I don't like. So what I'm going to do is edit this with the water mainly in mind, because that's ultimately what my star of the show effectively was. So I can bring my whites up here slightly more, and now I'm going to blow all those highlights, but I'll deal with those, like I say, when it comes to the remove tool. So now I'm going to take my blacks here, and if I start looking at the blacks, that's when it's going to start to change on the histogram. You can see the histogram coming over. So if I bring my blacks all the way up here, for example, they lose their crunchiness, and for me they're too much. I don't want to do that. So I want to keep them in a small bit of darkness anyway as it is, because they were dark rocks. And now the histogram has got a lot more detail here. And again, looking at this, you'd imagine that it would be, you know, a larger spike. So this spike here is representative of what you see on the water. You'd imagine that would be more, but if you look at the real estate that this has on the overall balance of the image, there's a lot more darker areas than there are whiter areas. So now coming down here, I can now never really use texture, but on this you can use texture, because I want to be able to bring out the texture in these rocks, but also some of the texture within the water as well. So if I take this and I bring this, say, yeah, I'd say 23 will be enough. And now if I start looking at dehaze, watch what it does to the image, but also watch what it does to the histogram. So when I start taking dehaze here, it's bringing the image darker. So it's bringing the histogram back down to the left-hand side. So if I unclick that, you'll see it moving more to the center. And if I bring this in again, it's making it darker. So I don't think we need any dehaze on this scene, because there was no haze to kind of cut through. But one area that I do want to add some color into is on the vibrance, because this is an autumn scene and I want to really bring out what is left of the colors here. You can see all the colors that are up on the top on the trees up here, and then the leaves as well below. So I want to bring out those colors more. So I'm going to give this a good touch of vibrance. So I'm going to go to 56, which is quite a lot, but I think it works within this because it's a subtleness on the color, and I don't need to have any saturation whatsoever. Now, next thing I want to do is I want to come down here into lens corrections. And I want to make sure that chromatic aberration has been ticked, but also as the enable profile correction has been ticked. So if I untick that, you see what it does to the image here is I get a vignette around the outside, whereas here it makes the image more balanced and it uses the profile that it has built in for my lens, which was, again, as we see up here, a Canon EF 16-35, a Canon EF 16-35. So they're the main things that I'm going to do from that. If I go down here, and when I start looking at the overall aspect of the image, I don't think there's any more that I need to do, but what I will do is I will try and brighten that image up slightly, so I make it a small bit brighter so I can see a bit more of those details. And again, being conscious with my histogram that I'm not blowing any of the detail here in the water. But even as it is right now, if I take those whites and bring those back down, you'll see the details are coming back out in the water. So the more I bring that up here, more overexposed it becomes. So I want to have that under so I can still see some of the texture within that water overall. Now, the other area I want to go in then is into my brush tool. So if I go in here to my brush and I create a new brush, which is what I have, and I make this slightly bigger, and what I want to do on this is specifically target within here, and I want to add in some dehaze and some texture, just purely into the water and nothing else. And it's not much that I'm going to add in, but what it will do is it'll start to create more of the detail and bring out the contrast within that water. So it starts to become more crunchy again. Even you can still see details within the water, but in certain areas here where there's quite a lot of water, it's difficult to be able to see those. So now if I come back to this here, and I take my dehaze. Now if I start to increase that, you'll start to see that some shapes coming out. See it's here, the difference? So all the way up and all the way down. So I want to make sure that I'm not going all the way up, but just enough to be able to bring that detail out, and then add a bit of texture as well on that. And that's effectively the image done. But I do want to deal with the areas that I have up here. So we're going to go in now here, and we're going to use this new tool, which is the remove tool. I've got AI clicked and also detect objects. And all effectively you do with this is you make your brush the right size, and then you come over the top of this area here, and then you're going to ask Lightroom to detect the area. So you see here it hasn't gotten it right, so now I want to fix that. I want to add more in here, and if I come down and I click on subtract, I can take these items off because I don't want it to affect any of that. I just want it to affect the area that I want to remove. And if I don't do this, what ends up happening then is it can get confused and I can have areas that overlap. So something along those lines. And then I click on subtract and click on remove. And what that's going to do is it's going to use AI. It's going to analyze the overall aspect of the image, and it's going to give me 3 options to choose from. And even here on the first option that it's given me, you can see it extended the rock up, but it's also filled in the gap with exactly the same color leaves that are there because it's taking the samples from elsewhere. So I think number 1 would do it for me, but let's have a look and see what number 2 gives us. So number 2 still keeps a bit of the sky, and then number 3, okay, adds in a rogue tree, which could work, but it doesn't look as good to me. So I'm going to go with number 1, and I'm going to do the same as we saw earlier on over here, because that was another area of brightness. So if I come in, and again, we just expand on that, and then we take off from here, like so. And now we go to remove, and now that's also going to remove any of the sky that's there and fill in those gaps. Now you'll know that they're there because you've seen it beforehand, but if you hadn't, then it wouldn't detract the eye away from this. The top area up here, let's see if it can do it on that. So we're cutting across a branch or a trunk of a tree, I should say. I want to again increase that here, click on subtract, and I want to take this off here. And now if I take this off here, and now what this is going to do here, when I look at this, is it's going to only work on this area. And let's see how it gets on here with the trunk of the tree. So we're going to go to remove. And now, again, it'll do its business and it'll take out this area. But it'll be interesting to see, will it keep that trunk of the tree there? It does. And that, to me, works perfectly fine on option 1. But let's go look at option 2. Even better. And now we go look at option 3. Again, bringing back in the gap. So for me, option 2 does the best job on that. So for me, now when I start looking at that image here, it's far more pleasing because I've got no pointless areas, let's just say, in the sky. And I purposely, again, composed the shot this way because it was a grey sky. It was going to add nothing into the image, and I wanted to get as much as I could within the frame. Now if I start looking at this image here and we start say zooming in to have a look around, so I think, you know, ultimately what I do like about this is you can see all of the texture here, as I said earlier on the rocks. You can see all of the leaves here. You can even see the water droplets on this leaf here. So if I come back out again from this just to give it a bit more of a view, coming up here again, all sharp the whole way through here. I love the texture that we have in the water here as it's coming over the top of the waterfall, and then all the way around as well. In total, this image works perfectly fine for me, and I do like now what I finally done with the water. As you can see, you still have all of this texture in the water, all of this movement. Where it does become a small bit blurred, if you want to call it that, is where there's a lot of water here, but now because what I've done there with the brush, it enables me to be able to bring out that detail. And then ultimately looking at the overall image, that is done for me. There's not any noise to be able to deal with on this, but generally what I'll always do at the very end of an image now is go in and click on denoise. And what that will do, again, is using the new tools that are within Lightroom, which are phenomenally powerful. It will take a sample, look and say, okay, is there noise? And if I look here, there is very little noise, so I exposed it right. But if I click and say, okay, do you know what? Yeah, let's go with it. We'll go with what it suggests, which is 50. And let that run, and then that will go and do its thing. So yeah, I think, I like this image here, but more importantly for me, it reinforces the whole idea of and the power of scouting, because you never know what's going to be ahead of you, and the better you are, more prepared you are, the better results that you can get. So thank you very much as always for joining this episode. I hope you enjoyed my insight into the behind the raw from this image, and I hope that I'm lucky enough for you to join me on my next episode next Sunday. And if you want to watch more from the channel, YouTube recommend this video here, and I'd love for you to go watch it. Slán go fóill.